When you think about the civil rights movement, where, Black, Latinx, Jewish people, others marched together for the support and uplift and empowerment of Black people, we weren't doing it just for Black people. We were doing it because we knew that that was going to make a difference in everyone's in the life and health of this nation, right? As we enter upon the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement next year, we have to remember that, yeah, it was surrounded for and by Black folks, but that wasn't the only, right? It was um, opening the door for everyone to have equity. And when you start an equity conversation with those that are most marginalized, everybody wins.
That's Michelle Merriweather, the president and CEO of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, talking about one historic example of different communities working together to uplift one another. I'm Jackie Peterson, a museum curator and writer, and that is the theme of our podcast series, Confronting Hate Together. This is part of a multimedia exhibit created through a unique partnership of the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, and the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience. In each episode, you'll hear from leaders of the Black, Jewish, and Asian communities about the challenges they face confronting hate and the work they do in their individual communities and together to combat the hate, bias, and discrimination we all see in the state of Washington and in the world today. We'll hear more from Michelle later in today's program, along with other leaders from the local African American community. In other episodes, we'll hear from leaders of the Jewish and Asian American and Pacific Island communities as we explore how we're all confronting hate together. Steve Sneed, who was born and raised in Seattle, has filled a unique place in the city's arts and African American communities for more than 40 years. A graduate of Garfield High School in 1974, he went on to get a performing arts degree from the University of Washington and became the program director for the Madrona Youth Theater. From there, he took over as the executive director of the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Center, a position he held for more than a decade. Then he became the managing artistic director for cultural programs at the Seattle Center. Since retiring in 2020, he has stayed busy by teaching theater arts part-time at Alan T. Sugimaya High School in Southlake.
When I was growing up, I was just telling someone this story the other day, that the central part of Seattle was largely in the 60s, 50s, 60s, early 70s. Racially, it was Asian, Jewish, and Black, almost in 3 equal parts. My sister's piano teacher was a Jewish woman who lived across the street. The Jewish couple that lived next door to us on the left-hand side, and then an Asian family lived on the right-hand side. And, if you look at the yearbooks at Garfield High School, it was back in the 60s. And those were the 3 primary ethnic groups, Asian or Japanese. My first best friend, Japanese guy, Kenny Fujimoto, I was telling him the current mayor, his father and mother met at Garfield High School. She was Japanese and he was African American. We came up in a community much different than other places, I would say. It was largely diverse. Then through the 60s, people started moving out. Asian folks moved up to Beacon Hill. Jewish community moved to Mercer Island. I mean, even where I worked at Langston Hughes, it was originally a Jewish synagogue. When I worked at Seattle Center, what I did is I managed 24 ethnic cultural festivals. So I met with them regularly. I helped them all to develop their events and bring them to Seattle Center. And so I was engaged in their communities. I came to their events. So I learned a lot, I felt, about other ethnic groups and how they function and operate in today's world. And the main reason that they wanted to come to Seattle Center was because they wanted to be on display at Seattle Center, this central place of the city, considered this gathering place. They wanted to be there because they wanted to be accepted for their culture, their beauty. They wanted to assemble as people, but they also really had a strong desire to put their culture on display. so people would see them as people and not, or less than people.
Steve sees a lot of ways in which the arts community could serve as a model for communities working together. He's currently working with the Intiman Theater on a production his wife wrote about community member Delbert Richardson's traveling African American History Museum.
The arts has something to teach us around that, because a lot of art is collaborative. And you have, people have ideas and you have to listen. You have to say, well, yeah, well, no, we can't do that because we got a boundary, called a budget, and we can't get outside the budget. We have to work within. But racially, it's a mixed group, and the production people are primarily white people, and then all the artistic people are all of us, all Black folks. And so we have to come together and work together. But common thing is common purpose. Being agreeable. There's some of that, and so I think the arts, because we whether it's musicians playing together or choirs singing together, there's a collaborative thing that has to happen. And art, it's not like artists are better at it than anybody else, but it's a critical part of producing art.
The collaborative nature of working in the arts also informs Steve's feelings towards the thorny issue of cultural appropriation.
Different communities will see it differently. They'll say, "Oh, well, that's okay for you to." I don't. No one ever got upset with the Arab community, young people doing hip hop, and they're doing it in Arab language. Different languages. Sometimes it's seen as a sign of respect and honor of what they do. Appropriation. I think people get into the area of appropriation when they're making a lot of money. Realistically, that's when it shows up like, wait a minute, because you're not just because you're doing it, but because you're doing it and you're making more money than anyone else. In the current generation, there's a lot of talk about appropriation. And I think it's just the camp people fall in. Different people fall in different camps. You actually don't hear it as much in the actual arts community as you do more in social activists talking about that. And like I say, when they make money, if they're making a lot of money, then you might hear it more. But I don't know. I don't put a lot of stock in that because, it's largely that people appreciate it. They love the music, especially with music. Koreans do some incredible Black gospel singing. I'm amazed at what they do. And dance, you see, especially on social media now, you can see dance that's clearly influenced by African American dancers. But I actually hear that less now for some reason, it seems. I think because social media is just too widespread. The sharing of culture is so widespread.
I think that we have a responsibility of perspective. When something happens, right, there's a lot of different ways to look at what has occurred. And I think for me as someone in the media, I'm always thinking about what way has this story not been told, or who in this situation hasn't been able to voice their say or their perspective on this situation. I think that when hate crimes occur, or even just when someone has a interaction and it is really biased, really unpleasant, it's really easy to make assumptions about who that person who was on the receiving side was. And I think a lot about how vital and important it is as media that we're always humanizing people, even when people have made mistakes, even when people aren't like perfect, that we're always like recognizing that every person in the situation is just that, a person, and not reducing them to their identities. I think that as media, it can be really easy to just lean really heavy on these kind of age-old storylines or narratives that are kind of ingrained in our media, and it's really important for us to create tension with those narratives and find ways that we can continuously present the stories and the people who these stories are about as like three-dimensional full people.
That's Acacia Salisbury, a producer at Converge Media, the Seattle-based news organization founded by her father, Omari Salisbury. Acacia is a 2019 graduate of the Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia, and started at Converge in February of 2020, just a month before COVID turned the world upside down, followed by the murder of George Floyd and the protests that took place across the country. For Acacia and Converge, being a part of the community they cover is an essential part of the process.
I feel really like fortunate. I would even say like blessed to be so ingrained in the community in Seattle, because I think that ultimately trust is so important. And so I would say like for me personally, but also like for Converge as a whole, we're always thinking about how we could do the least amount of harm, and always making sure that even as we're telling stories that we're respectful of the people who those stories being out in the world impacts. So, when someone in our community has passed, or when something bad has happened, making sure that like we're in touch with family, we're in touch with friends, that we're really moving with respect and understanding that whatever we write, whatever image we put out about this person isn't just about this person. It has rippling consequences on the people who were in that person's life. We want to gather all the facts. And if that means being patient and not maybe being the first person to release something, it's worthwhile for us to be able to tell a full and complete story. I think something else that I think a lot about is whose story isn't being told. Like, where are there opportunities in my community to highlight stories or talk to people who aren't maybe the types of folks who stories would be seen on a larger platform or a more traditional media outlet. And so I think being in conversation with community is really essential.
As a recent graduate, Acacia is also in constant conversation with others of her generation, many of whom are both disillusioned by the oppression and hate they see around them and intent on changing it.
Right now, young people do not feel very heard or represented. That is a really big thing, I think, for Gen Z. I think that the things that they feel like are really concerning aren't being adequately addressed in a serious manner. I think there's a lot of cynicism that just kind of is permeating the culture in general now, but most especially in people, where people feel really deeply demoralized. And so when a bad thing happens, when a hate crime happens, when something racist or homophobic or anti-Semitic happens, it can feel very like, I guess this is just how the world is. When we think about hatred and bigotry, oftentimes we think about the interpersonal, right? We think about individual situations. Um, but I think that young people are thinking very systematically, specifically about the environment, and not just the environment as in like we need to save the earth, but the ways in which impacts of climate change are disproportionately impacting certain groups of people, and what the implications of that kind of deep-seated systemic bigotry means.
But despite all the problems she and her generation see in the world, Acacia also still sees signs of hope, as in the works of Chicago-based activist and prison abolitionist Miriam Kaba.
And she wrote this book, We Do This Until We're Free. And one of the things she says in that book is hope is a discipline. And I've been thinking about that a lot, that line, hope is a discipline. I think that spending time in my community reinvigorates me and reminds me that there actually is no choice but things to get better. Like we have a collective obligation to each other as human beings to do all we can to make the world a better, more hospitable, kinder, place for each other. Ultimately, the history of organizing, the history of people who have been trying to combat hatred and bigotry is so rich. And if they can do it, we can continue. Um, and I think that really grounds me in optimism and really is a part of my practice of trying to make hope a discipline. I just can't afford to be cynical about the future because I have to be imagining this brighter world in partnership with other people.
Eddie Rye Jr., a living historian and community activist who can trace his roots from Shreveport, Louisiana to Seattle, where his family moved in 1952, as his father, Eddie Rye Sr., was organizing for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. On his journey through life, Eddie Jr. has fought against racism in the U.S. military, where he was a National Guardsman stationed in San Antonio, Texas, at Boeing, where he worked in the 1960s, and in the media, where he hosted a radio program on the Black-owned station KYAC. He led community efforts to change the name of a major thoroughfare in Seattle, then called Empire Way, to Martin Luther King Jr. Way. Now the host of the radio show Urban Forum Northwest, Eddie has been encouraged by the residents of the Black Lives Matter movement and sees echoes of his past activism in today's young people. Unapologetically prioritizing the Black community's needs, he thinks the most pernicious form of racism today is economic racism, which prevents Black people from sharing in the bounty other communities enjoy.
The economic hatred and economic discrimination is the most harmful discrimination of all because it impacts the whole household, the whole neighborhood, all your organizations, including your houses of worship. It has a devastating impact. What kind of college is you going to be able to go to? Now we have a deal where our right to economic participation is under attack right now. And in Washington State, it's really, Democrats in charge. In 2021, African Americans did 0.18% of the state's business. Governor Inslee signs executive order in January 2022. At the end of the year, African Americans did 0.22%. You got one white contractor who has all the trucking contracts, who falsified his record to take advantage of these opportunities. And then the Attorney General says, he can reapply. Now, this person's committed fraud. If he was a Black contractor, his butt would be in jail. But that's what white privilege looks like.
Not that he closes the door on working with other communities. In fact, he thinks it's essential for Black people to achieve our goals.
I was a campaign manager for Washington State in 1984, and I'm still a firm believer in the Rainbow Coalition. I work with the Community Coalition of Immigrants and Refugees and Communities of Color. And I think it's essential that all people work together. As a matter of fact, on April 4th, the 56th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., we observed that day and also honor people honor, like Dr. Mike Tooley, who is Executive Director of the United Indians of All Tribes. Lika Fernandez is the Director of the Office of Minority Women Business Enterprise. And we also have the first woman and the first person of color to ever be the president and CEO of the Greater Seattle YMCA, Loria Yeti. So, we are inclusive in the name of Dr. King. There's no other way to be.
Those are the lessons he taught to his daughter, Angela, who joined Eddie and his wife, Andrea, in their activism from early childhood on. He's excited to see Angela, a graduate of Seattle University School of Law, continuing his legacy of activism. Angela works in Washington, D.C. in a wide range of roles, including at the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, as a senior advisor to the United States House Committee on Homeland Security, and as a political commentator for ESPN.
Well, I had her exposed to meetings and demonstrations. As a matter of fact, there's one picture. It was August 28th, 1983, and she was 3 years, 10 months old. And she had a sign with her mother saying, "Make MLK Day a national holiday." And I think it was about 2 or 3 months. Anyway, November 3rd or November 2nd of that year, Ronald Reagan signed in the first Martin Luther King Jr. holiday bill, which would occur the third Monday of 1986. And then 4 weeks after that, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled, because we were having a fight over names to change the name of the Street of Empire Way to honor Martin Luther King Jr. Way. They ruled in the city's favor so we could change that name. But now I had her at meetings and stuff, and she was active in school. As a matter of fact, when she was a student at Holy Names Academy, she wanted to start, her and some of her friends wanted to start a Black student union. So, but I think early exposure, like they get, when they're young, they want to hear a lot of talking and stuff. But after a while, I didn't think she was paying attention. And then she started asking me questions. I said, yep, she's getting it. She's getting it.
The National Urban League was founded in New York City in 1910 and came to Seattle in 1930. Its mission is to empower African Americans, as well as other diverse, underserved communities, to thrive by securing educational and economic opportunities. Michelle Merriweather's history with the Urban League began in her home of Los Angeles, where she started as a volunteer while working as a business development manager for Starbucks. She eventually became the first woman president of the Los Angeles Urban League Young Professionals. When the opportunity arose to become vice president of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle in 2015, she moved north and in 2018 became president and CEO of the organization.
The Urban League was started to reduce the economic barriers against Black people, but everyone wins when we support those that are most vulnerable, right? Everybody does. The whole community wins. Say both locally and nationally, historically since the beginning, we have emphasized partnership and relationship and building community with people of all backgrounds, inclusive of the Anti-Defamation League, who we've had a long historic relationship with both nationally and locally. Unidos, nationally and locally, it's El Centro de la Raza, ACRS, among others, Chief Seattle Club, among others. This is a community where we strongly believe that we go further when we work together and when we support and uplift each other. And I'm grateful for my brothers and sisters in all walks of life in those organizations that I have mentioned, that when we were going through things have stood side by side with me in addressing those issues. And I hope that I have been able to do the same. And the Urban League as an organization has been able to do the same. So when something harmful or hurtful happens, be it defamation or defacing of a Jewish temple or something even more harmful, it is my responsibility, just as I would when it was a mosque defamed or burned in Tacoma, to speak out against hate, and that is not acceptable in a community that we are all sharing together. So while I may not remember the exact legislation or the exact time, I know that I don't hesitate to be there in community and standing side by side of my brothers and sisters in this journey of creating a better and a more inclusive and tolerant community for everyone.
One group that the Urban League is dedicated to seeing treated with more inclusion and tolerance is formerly incarcerated people. That means helping those people readjust to life outside the prison system, helping them find housing and employment, and making sure they can exercise their right to vote.
We as a country have decided that where we will win on a record is incarcerating people. It was sad. Instead of providing people who make mistakes, and certainly, some cause harm in our community, instead of rehabilitation and training and forgiveness, we incarcerate. So when they are introduced back home or into society, they are in search of community, love, respect, to learn how to be free and live again, right? So our first obligation is certainly to make sure that they have a safe place to call home. They are able to address any of their past challenges, the things that may have gotten them in the situation that they are in, both internally and externally, right? They have to have the opportunity to address their internal challenges, right? To make sure that they don't go back and make sure that they have the supports that they need. So that is part of the work that we do, also making sure that they're addressing their own challenges. Then we connect them with job readiness, connection to jobs and opportunities so that they are able to gain some experience, earn a livable wage, be contributors to society, and regain all the things that they lost while they were incarcerated. We have been able to work with several corporations to change their hiring practices and their hiring and discriminatory practices, quite frankly, in hiring. So some of those things have included not asking if somebody has a criminal record, not sharing that with their teams and the people that they work with, keeping that confidential if for some reason it matters that they have a criminal history. And then we also identify careers and opportunities where it absolutely doesn't matter. Tech is a big one. Opportunities to work from home, opportunities to work with their hands in construction and trades, and several others. And when those issues arise, we make, be it discriminatory issues or challenges, we are an advocate for them as well. And we also pride ourselves in making sure that we hire folks with that lived expertise to do this work. So many of the folks that are leading our workforce programs and serving others have that lived experience as well. So we are practicing what we preach.
But despite these and all the other difficulties Michelle sees in her community and the country as a whole, she finds ways to remain optimistic.
Have things gotten better as a universal collective? No. We are in some of the scariest times in our recent history. I imagine that those experienced enslavement, certainly the brutal escape of slavery, mass incarceration, civil rights movement, the Holocaust, I have no doubt experienced things far graver than we are experiencing now. That is the privilege of coming generations after those that have fought, the hardest battles of our history. But the things that we are addressing now sure do mimic the things that I have heard from my grandmother's aunts and uncles, parents, read in history books, that if we don't address it now, we will be experiencing the same things that our grandparents and ancestors did, right? The things that are happening now, the hate that we are confronted with now is so blatant. It seems to be everywhere, and folks seem to be very comfortable with it. But on the flip side, I will say what gives me strength and comfort is knowing that organizations are coming to, and individuals and people are coming together and saying, we're going to defend each other, not on my watch, right? When these things happen, I know that I am not alone. I know that we're confronting this together. And I will always say that while we have challenges, dark times, the good will always prevail, right? And those that are out here putting good out in the world and doing all of the things that they can to empower and support and uplift others will win the long game, right? Sadly and painfully, we have to go through some of these struggles, and maybe it is happening to bring us closer together, to have us work closer together, to make sure that we are communicating with each other, empowering each other, and lifting each other up. I hate that it has to be that way, but I am grateful. We are a stronger collective because of the forces that are coming up against us that seem to be getting stronger and getting louder and getting more empowered and more emboldened But we're able to match that force by force and in a manner that is bringing all of these communities together. And I think that is a force within itself and a powerful collective that can defend any amount of hate. Love always conquers hate, right? And respectful treatment of all individuals, regardless of background, who they choose to love, where they choose to live, etc., where they choose to worship, will win. Will win every time. Every time.
I'm Jackie Peterson, and you've been listening to Confronting Hate Together, a joint production of the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, and the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience. Thanks to our lead project sponsor, the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods, and our major sponsors, the For Culture Heritage Project and the National Park Foundation. Thanks as well to the Washington State Historical Society for their Diversity and Local History Internship Grant, and our interns, Shania Black and Daniel Sauter. This program was written by Jeff Schwager and Jackie Peterson, edited and engineered by Kamna Shastri, and produced by Jeff Schwager. Executive producers are Cassie Chin, Stephanie Johnson-Tolliver, and Lisa Kranzler. Be sure to check out our other podcasts and our online exhibit to learn more about how the Black, Asian, and Jewish communities are working, building bridges, and confronting hate together.